unlimited access to the spa from now on. How could John keep this a secret? It's just evil, unforgivable. Without my knowledge, my in-laws' place had transformed into a luxury hotel. Now, I can enjoy the spa every day and indulge in delicious meals. But kidding aside, the thought of them using my precious son for their own desires, it's outrageous. They better be ready. My name is Amy, a 35-year-old office worker in the administrative department of a pharmacy. I live with my husband John and our first-grade son Edward. John and I met through a colleague at work, and from the moment we met, we clicked. We quickly became close, started dating, and were married the following year. With my upbeat husband John and lively son Edward, I was leading a life of ordinary happiness. Another thing that makes me glad I married John is having his mother-in-law Renda in our lives. Having lost my mother early, I was raised by my father. My mother-in-law, who I barely knew as a mother figure, treated me like her own daughter since the start of our marriage. Amy, do you have any plans this Sunday? Why don't you and Edward come over for dinner? She would say, always treating us to delicious meals. When Edward was younger, she was a great support for my parenting struggles, even helping to pick him up from daycare when I couldn't leave work. Edward grew very attached to her, and spending Christmas at my in-laws had become a tradition for our family. Amy, your mother-in-law really is the best, isn't she? My colleague Emma would say, listening with an envious look. It was Emma who introduced me to John. They had been friends since college. Emma, with her bright personality and many friends, joined the company with me. We were close enough to share work frustrations, family matters, and personal issues. The pharmacists and other staff were kind, and the company had excellent benefits. Emma and other colleagues with children continued to work full-time as before our pregnancies. Recently, John's been saying he has to work on weekends and isn't home even on his days off, I said, sounding a bit discontented. Are you suspecting him of cheating? Emma laughed. That's laughable. But it was true. John had been away from home more often. Dad, are you working again today? Edward asked, wanting to play with John. I have to work, sorry, John said apologetically. I couldn't say anything back, feeling proud of John for working hard for our family. Little did I know back then that such dedication would turn into such a terrible betrayal. Rock, paper, scissors. Oh, the worst, I sighed. My workplace is usually closed on Sundays and holidays, but about once a month, we're on duty for the hospital gate on Sundays. Accordingly, our pharmacy also opens. It seems Christmas is our turn this time. We played rock, paper, scissors to decide who would work. Unfortunately, I lost. I wanted to spend Christmas at my in-laws, but no choice. I have to do my best, I muttered to myself, only to be chuckled at by the friend sitting next to me. It's not funny, I said to her. She laughed and apologized. Sorry. This woman is also an officer, and we met at the daycare. Her son Henry and Edward are very close, and our families have become friends. We used to go on trips together, though we've been too busy lately. Her husband Tom is also a kind and gentle person. Her name is Isabella. I call her Henry's mom, or Isabella. By the way, Isabella, thanks for playing with Edward in the park last Sunday when I had to work. When John had to take care of Edward on weekends, today I played with Henry in the park, Edward told me. When I asked John about it, he said he ran into Henry and his parents at the park by chance and played together. Really? I asked John, but his vague response frustrated me. By the way, mother-in-law called and said she's looking forward to Christmas. I can't make it, but have fun. I can't go because of work, so it looks like Christmas will be without me this year, I told Isabella. Mother-in-law sounded very disappointed when I told her I couldn't come, but maybe I'll put John to work and have him do a thorough house cleaning. It's been a while, she said, sounding quite excited about the idea. Feel free to use him as much as you like, I laughed as I talked with mother-in-law. It was close to Christmas when this happened. I was working a late shift that day and had to do some unexpected overtime. I hurriedly tried to contact John but couldn't reach him. I ended up calling my son's mobile phone. Mom, are you done with work? Edward answered the phone with a cheerful voice, happy to hear from me. Sorry, Edward, Mom is working late. Can you put Dad on the phone? But Edward said John wasn't there. Wondering where they could be, I said, Hello, Amy. It must be tough working so late. John called and said he's going to be late because of work, mother-in-law said. Hello, Amy. It must be tough working so late. John called and said he's going to be late because of work, mother-in-law said. She told me that while she was preparing dinner in her house. John called her. Sorry, Mom. Amy's on a late shift and I should get home early, but I have to work overtime. Please help. After saying that, John hung up and couldn't be reached again. I was furious with John's actions. He hadn't contacted me at all, thinking maybe he wouldn't get caught. I rushed home. John still hadn't returned, and at the dinner table were mother-in-law and Edward, eating. Mother-in-law said she was happy to have dinner alone with her grandson. Even though I apologize, I really respect mother-in-law. John came home late that night. Hey, about work, you promised to take care of things when I have a late shift. Can you at least keep that promise? I said quietly, what can I do? It's work, I muttered to myself. John raised his voice and even suggested that I quit my job or become a part-timer. When John met me, he praised me for working in healthcare, but that John who said such nice things is no longer here. Our current lifestyle is also thanks to my income. Even though I'm an equal partner to John, he's been doing less housework lately and hasn't been taking care of Edward either. And this guy, hey, you're not cheating, are you? I looked at John with cold eyes. There's no way. You're overthinking, Amy. He suddenly changed his tone and put his arm around my shoulder. That said it all. John has always tried to appease me like this when he's lying or feeling guilty. How dare he cheat? He better be prepared. I was glad Edward was asleep. I didn't want to show our son such an ugly fight. From then on, we acted normal in front of Edward, but when it was just the two of us, we hardly talked or even made eye contact. When I told my colleague Emma about what happened, she said, "That guy is the worst. Let me know if you need anything." That was a cool thing to say. Days passed, and before I knew it, it was Christmas Eve. Take good care of Edward, will you? Say hello to Renda for me, I said to John, but as usual, he didn't even meet my eyes. I'm off then, he replied indifferently, and John and Edward left for my in-laws' house. What's with that attitude? It's so annoying, I thought to myself. I spent a lonely Christmas Eve alone in our eerily quiet house. There was no contact from John, but thinking he was having a good time with mother-in-law gave me a little peace of mind. I remembered mother-in-law saying she'd make John clean the house. I wondered if he was being worn out by chores and couldn't help but feel a bit of schadenfreude. Little did I know John was doing something unthinkable at that time. Christmas Day was busy with quite a few patients. Fortunately, I didn't have to work overtime, so I left work and went straight home. I planned to join my in-laws the next afternoon and spend the holiday with mother-in-law. Might as well enjoy some alone time for a change. As I was thinking this, my mobile phone rang. It was mother-in-law. Thinking it was going to be a complaint about John being lazy, I answered. Amy, Merry Christmas. You must be tired from working on Christmas. You did great. Mother-in-law's voice sounded kind, not irritated at all. Merry Christmas, Renda. I wish I could have spent it with you too. Is Edward just playing games? When I asked, mother-in-law fell silent. Even after calling Renda's name a few times, there was no response. I wondered if it was a bad signal. Amy, John and Edward didn't come here this year. I spent Christmas alone, mother-in-law finally said, and then began to sob over the phone. I was in a panic. John and Edward definitely left the house yesterday. Where could they possibly be now? There was a long silence between mother-in-law and me. I'll head over to your place right now, I said. It's about a 40-minute drive to my in-laws. On the way, my mind was filled with thoughts of Edward. What if they were involved in an accident or some incident? These worries spun in my head. When I arrived at my in-laws, mother-in-law was already waiting outside. As soon as she got into my car, I asked quietly, should we call the police? Mother-in-law slowly shook her head. As I wondered why, mother-in-law began to speak. Amy, I'm really sorry about my stupid son. Do you think John is having an affair? Mother-in-law looked at me with teary eyes, and I almost started crying too. What? Actually, that's when I remembered something and hurriedly drove to a certain place. When we reached our destination, I called Edward's mobile phone. Hello? Is Dad nearby? I asked. Yeah, he's here. Come quickly, Mom, Edward answered immediately. Even though we have been apart for only a day, Edward's voice sounded dear to me. What is it, Amy? I'm busy right now. I heard John's voice on the phone, sounding like he wanted to end the call. Immediately, hearing that voice made me feel intense loathing, wanting to confront him. Renda, you said something about making him clean, right? So, are you at your parents' house now? John's response on the phone was calm. Yeah, that's right, Amy. I can't wait to see you. When did he become so adept at lying as easily as breathing? I thought to myself, should I have quit my job? Should I have tried harder at home? But none of that justifies an affair. Oh, Sorenda, you started a luxury hotel. Does that mean unlimited spa access? How could John keep this a secret? I won't forgive him, I said in a low tone filled with hatred. On the phone, John seemed quite flustered by my accusation. His silence prompted me to continue. Hey, come out of the room. This is the luxury hotel I always wanted to visit. You said it was too expensive, remember? As I spoke fluently, John seemed to give up. I'm sorry, he said in a barely audible voice. I found this place using the GPS on Edward's mobile phone. This hotel, not far from my in-laws, was the place I wanted to visit. The fact that John, who said it was too expensive for me, was enjoying himself here with his mistress infuriated me. Perhaps it showed on my face because on the way to the hotel, mother-in-law kept apologizing. It was then that I found out for the first time that when I worked late shifts, mother-in-law was almost always the one taking care of Edward. I hadn't noticed because she would return home before I got back. John, who was terrible at cooking, used to buy ready-made food, and if mother-in-law tried to cook, he stubbornly refused her. Looking back, that must have been a strategy to keep me from finding out. Even during that short time, John was so enthralled with his mistress. Mother-in-law initially believed John was really working, but as his absences increased, her suspicions of an affair naturally grew. The climax was when mother-in-law saw John walking arm in arm with an unknown woman, looking intimate. She debated whether to consult me but decided against it. The main reason was that she didn't want to lose the chance to see Amy and Edward. Mother-in-law sobbed in the passenger seat, knowing she cared so much for us. Tears streamed down my cheeks too. Mother-in-law was more considerate of me and Edward than John ever was. This time, John had contacted her, saying he would spend some rare time alone with Edward, but asked her to cover for him, saying he'd be at her house. Mother-in-law, suspecting a lie, worried about Edward and contacted me. I despised John from the bottom of my heart for involving so many people, I thought bitterly. At the hotel, after explaining the situation, we were made to wait in the lobby. Then, a man and a woman with guilty expressions on their faces emerged, along with Mom. I was getting bored. I played a law with Henry, who was Edward's friend from daycare. Henry looked around and said, "Looks like my dad hasn't arrived yet." He seemed a bit disappointed. John's mistress was Isabella, another mom from the daycare. I wasn't sure how long the affair had been going on, but these two fools had boldly involved our children. Apparently, they had told their sons that their respective parents would join them later. How despicable. John had booked 2 rooms, one for the children and the other for themselves. So repulsive. Thanks to the hotel's kindness, mother-in-law and I were allowed to stay in a room for a while, where she looked after the children in the other room. Isabella having an affair with my husband and then talking to me normally at committee meetings was unbelievable. I spoke in a calm tone. I thought Amy hadn't noticed anything. It was so funny. Isabella laughed. What is this woman? I never would have guessed that Isabella, who seemed so fragile and beautiful, was actually this spiteful. I stared at her quietly, pondering the unpredictability of people. John himself seemed a bit taken aback by Isabella's true nature. This woman, without being asked, happily began to talk about how and when she started her affair with John. Their relationship began when our children were in senior kindergarten. On a day I was sick and couldn't attend a parent meeting, so I asked John to go in my place. It was Isabella who made the first move. We had known each other as families and had each other's contact information. From that day on, they began to communicate more frequently. It started with complaints about their spouses but gradually turned into personal conversations. Soon, they began meeting more often, and it didn't take long for their relationship to become romantic. But now it's all over. What a pity, Isabella chuckled, her nonchalant attitude heard loud and clear. I said, "You seem quite relaxed for someone about to face serious consequences." Ignoring her surprised look, I stood up decisively, facing my bewildered husband. I said, "Come on, get up and check out. I've called a ride for you, so get ready quickly," I said with a slight smile as I left the room. Seeing Isabella's face twitch a bit from my remark felt oddly satisfying. Now begins the hellish drive. The trip isn't over until we're home, I thought to myself. After checking out, as we headed to the parking lot, Henry ran joyfully towards the person he was waiting for. Henry's dad, Tom, Isabella's husband. Sorry to keep you waiting, Henry. Have you been good? Tom said in his usual calm manner. Dad, can Edward and I go home first? Mom and you need to talk, Henry said gently, and the two boys happily got into my car. Thank you. We'll have a long talk on the way home, I said, glaring at Isabella. I had learned from contacting Tom that he was supposedly at work and Isabella had lied about visiting her parents far away to come here. Both of them were utterly despicable. I was forced to come here because John threatened to use Edward to ostracize Henry at school if I didn't. Isabella started with a shallow lie. Really? You seemed so eager to tell me everything just a while ago. I continued calmly. Isabella laughed. What is this woman? I thought, staring at her quietly, pondering the unpredictability of people. John himself seemed taken aback by Isabella's true nature. She happily began to talk about how and when she started her affair with John, and it was unbelievable to hear. Their relationship began when our children were in senior kindergarten. On a day I was sick and couldn't attend a parent meeting, so I asked John to go in my place. It was Isabella who made the first move. We had known each other as families and had each other's contact information. From that day on, they began to communicate more frequently. It started with complaints about their spouses but gradually turned into personal conversations. Soon, they began meeting more often, and it didn't take long for their relationship to become romantic. But now it's all over. What a pity, Isabella chuckled with a nonchalant attitude. I said, you seem quite relaxed for someone about to face serious consequences. I ignored her surprised look, standing up decisively, facing my bewildered husband. I placed the voice recorder with our earlier conversation in Tom's hand as Isabella desperately tried to grab it. Don't bother. I have another copy just for myself, I said, smiling as I got into my car. As I drove away, John's pathetic voice called out from behind, Wait, what am I supposed to do now? Go home alone. Oh, but I thought you might feel lonely, so I arranged a ride for you too. I pointed behind John. Behind him stood my colleague Emma and her husband, who was also a friend from college. Apparently, John owed him a big favor and couldn't stand up to him. I glanced over and saw they were already scolding him. Emma gave me a look that said, Leave it to me. Though my husband was a disappointment, I was lucky to have supportive people around me. As I expected, everyone's ride home was hellish. Isabella desperately denied her relationship with John in the car, but no one believed her with the voice recorder playing. Eventually, she admitted to having other affairs. I don't know if John was serious, but he was the one being played from the start. The reason Isabella targeted John was so petty because Edward got the lead role in a school play over Henry. I was furious. I planned to make him pay a hefty alimony. Henry's custody went to Tom, of course. He said he was going back to his parents' place, a bit far away. John came home late that night, looking like a ghost. It seems like he got a good scolding from Emma and her husband. John always said his college friends were very important to him, as if it were a mantra from the beginning of our marriage. Now, because of this incident, John probably won't be invited to their gatherings anymore. It's nothing but karma. He brought this upon himself. He should regret it. What angered me the most was that every time he met his mistress, John told Edward, Today it's a secret between us men, okay? Don't tell Mom. Edward kept that promise and never told me anything. When I found out, I was moved to tears. John and I successfully finalized our divorce. You stupid man, how can you face your late father now? Don't ever show your face again, mother-in-law said, slapping him. John finally realized the gravity of his actions and cried like a child. But my heart didn't waver. Afterward, John requested a transfer to a branch outside the prefecture. He paid the alimony and is keeping up with child support. As for me and Edward, we're living with mother-in-law at her place. I considered returning to my parents' home, but my father has remarried and has a new family. Living together would be impossible. Mother-in-law suggested we stay with her until our lives stabilize. People are often surprised by our unique relationship. But I still cherish mother-in-law like my real mother. I hesitated about what to call her, but I still call her Renda. We're keeping it a secret, but we plan to celebrate her 60th birthday at that hotel. I splurged and booked the most expensive room. This should turn the unpleasant memories into enjoyable ones. My job became far, and Edward had to transfer schools, but Tom's parents lived near our former in-laws, so the boys ended up in the same school again. That was a surprise. Once things settle down, I might rent an apartment near work. But for now, I want to cherish this time a little longer.